First of all, what was planned? Plans are simple and they usually do not work the way expected. There are 5 exits all along Omaha Beach that you see over there till the end of the beach. So 5 exits. The first thing you notice when you come here is that these slopes cannot be climbed by vehicles. In other words, the only way for a highly equipped army like the one of the United States of America in 1944 was to open these exits, right? So the whole strategy at first was built up in order to destroy the obstacles here, the resistance, so the strongholds, German strongholds on top of the bluffs, explode with engineers the sea walls here and fill up the anti-tank ditch and then move inland. They really believed this would work perfectly. So they had divided the beach into sections from C to F. Charlie was for the rangers. You have cliffs, you have rangers, right? And then easy, dog, fox, till the end. 8 companies were to land here, 6 barges per company. It makes 1,450 men. Almost, it's the right number, plus or minus 2 or 3. There were to land here at low tide, so facing these kind of obstacles that the Germans had built for a high tide landing. This was tripods that were meant to blow up the flat bottom barges, rip them open. You had also the Romans asparagus, you know, these poles that were mined. You had is it on this side? Yes. You had a telemine on top of it. You see? They had planted this also on fields with chains in between, so one exploded the other to avoid having gliders coming in. But the whole idea was to land when the Germans did not wait for them, hoping that the bombing on the beaches would have more than softened, really destroyed the obstacles, and then only scattered machine guns would remain from the top of the bluff. Tanks coming in before, supporting the troops, helping them moving up and moving quickly. What are the information we have that in a way can give us this quite clear idea that this is what the planners had in mind? Well, the men who landed here in the first waves had 1 week of food in their backpack, right? It meant you are going to move forward. Who knows when the counterattack comes? Don't be stopped by hunger, right? Another bad mistake that was made here is that these plywood barges had a reinforced ramp. And behind the ramp, the first man behind was the NCO. So the highest casualty rate was on the NCO. So we come to what happened. They were launched 5-6 hours before on these flat-bottom plywood barges that were shaken, moving for hours. Their main concern was throwing up, not throwing up in the barges. They probably felt quite confident then. They had heard the planes passing over their heads. Then they had seen the shells falling inland, not knowing exactly where, you know, passing over their heads, the destroyers and the very powerful 15-inch shells from the battleships. They had been told it was a walk, so I think they must have believed it for a while. And then at dawn they came ashore. The first thing the NCOs discovered is that you had no craters on the beach. And this was really bad because they knew that when you have a bombing, you have those bombs that can fall for sure, the other one's long. Okay, no obstacles at all, but everything was silent here. Of course, the Germans had been staying during all the bombing in their bunkers, those we have seen, safe enough there, and now they were on top of the bluff. So when the first barges arrived, hit the beach, the ramp opened, and there the Germans started shooting. Here you have more or less 150 yards Low tide is 300 yards away. Right? It's very shallow. So you say maybe. No. The German machine guns shot 2,000 rounds a minute, 25 a second, with a range of about more than 1 mile. Efficient range. 1 cartridge out of 10 was a tracer. So they just shot straight inside into the barge. So this is how you explain the dramatic casualty rate of the first waves. Especially those who were unlucky enough to land where they were meant to land. In other words, in front of the draw. What about the tanks? 96 tanks were to land here and support the infantry. The beach was divided between the 29th Infantry Division and the Big Red One that was leading and had 2/3 of the beach on the other side. Almost all the tanks of the Big Red One sunk. Why? They were launched 5 miles offshore. They had a inflated screen that had been tested on English lakes. No waves. Here you had waves this high, they launched them and they sunk. Noticing that, and without combining, without communicating, here the officers decided to bring them on barges. But what happened? Tanks on barges, the barges were slower than the barges with men. So instead of coming 5 minutes before the man ashore, they came 5 minutes or half an hour late. So no help for the first wave. Then when they will come ashore, there will be easy targets because they were very slow for the mortars the Germans had here. So some sunk because of the mortars. And even when they came ashore, they had to stay underwater in the distance because you see, there was a 75 gun that blew up any Sherman tanks, you know, like a toy. Here you had other guns. Now there you have a bunker. And here I'm going to show it. You had an 88 gun that could shoot accurate 20 rounds a minute at 19,000 meters, so it's 12 miles, right? So there was no efficient tank and fire support for the men here. Some were lucky enough. They got lost because of the swell and landed in between the draws. They had better chances to survive. Now, you've seen the obstacles. You imagine the few survivors. What did they do? Do you think they came up here to the shingle beach or to the gravel beach? No, they stayed hidden behind the obstacles. This meant that the engineers that came 5 minutes later, who had as a first mission to open channels, the tide was coming in. They had to open channels to allow the future waves to come ashore safely and not explode on the telemines. They could not do the job because you had men behind the obstacles. And even those who came up, luckily, survived and made their way up to the shingle beach and were saved. Well, saved. Let's say that you had mortar shells falling once in a while, but they were no target anymore. They were green. All these men, it was their first experience. They had lost their NCOs. They had no officers. So imagine a mess. First wave, second wave, a disaster. You can imagine the second wave? The second wave came ashore hearing the machine gunning for half an hour. You start seeing, you know things are not, when you come ashore you have bodies floating, all your comrades, most of them, 90% hurt, killed, moaning, crying. I mean, so the second wave came, 90% casualties the same. With the third wave, so 1 hour later, 7:30, you had the first officers that came ashore. In between the draws, not crazy, they thought, okay, I'm going to build up a headquarter, you know, in a safer place. Both officers, Cotta and Taylor, for the 2 different divisions, made exactly the same decision. They analyzed the situation, they say, okay, the mistake is trying to open the draws. We have to move inland, one way or another. So, they built up an army, a small army, and started climbing the bluffs, so crossing the mine, no man's land, you see driving, climbing the bluffs, cleaning up the bluffs, but these strongholds on top were impregnable. Fearing to be trapped by a counterattack coming from inland by Germans, they had to take the villages before and then came back. This is why it took so much time. This is why the first draw here was open 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 9 hours after the beginning of the battle. And here they opened at 6 o'clock and they could not move inland before 10 o'clock, before the ditches were filled. So you have a full day 15 hours of fighting with the flagships, not knowing what's going on, starting to plan to divert all the remains to Utah Beach, where they had good news coming from. You see, so it is this position. It was not a 90% casualty during all the day. Then these positions were silenced. You had the man landing in between, moving inland. The beach was a mess. Can you imagine? At 8 o'clock, the beach master decided no more landing on vehicles. Why? Because you had obstacles. The beach was this size, so they resumed at 11 o'clock, starting to land. 3,000 vehicles were landed here. 3,000. You are landing, it's amazing. One vehicle for 10 men. Imagine the logistics. So this is what happened, right? It was a mess during all the day. Dramatic, absolutely dramatic for the first 2